It's a story about a kid dealing with the hardships of life through literal escapist fantasy and adventure. It's a story that keeps pushing the boundaries of reality until any perceivable separation collapses. It's a story that challenges all of us to ask ourselves, is nothing the absence of everything, or is nothing still something? Hi, I'm Dan Larson, and this is the history of the NeverEnding Story. Thank you to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Go to nordvpn.com/toygalaxy to get the 2-year plan with an exclusive deal plus 4 bonus months free. It's risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. What can NordVPN do for you? It can give you a lot more privacy when you're online. No one else needs access to the files you're moving around. NordVPN helps protect your communications and personal data and makes hacking close to impossible. Whether you're sitting in a public place like the food court at the mall or sipping a coffee at the local bookstore, shopping a domestic website or an international one, NordVPN makes sure your money and your transaction are private. Visit whatever sites you want, whenever and wherever. If you're traveling, get better prices on flight tickets, car hires, and hotels. Book virtually from a different country and get the best quotes. Get the most out of your subscription and keep up with your favorite series. Change the country to access streaming services and providers. NordVPN makes it easy to watch HBO Max or Netflix as if you were sitting in your own living room. For instance, I was able to watch Twin Peaks on Netflix UK for a recent video. So go to nordvpn.com/toygalaxy to get the 2-year plan with an exclusive deal plus 4 bonus months free. That's nordvpn.com/toygalaxy. It's risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. And thank you again to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. The NeverEnding Story is a 1984 feature film directed by Wolfgang Petersen based on a 1979 novel by Michael Ende. It is one of the most controversial films of all time, not only for being despised by original author Michael Ende, but also for having a runtime of only 94 minutes. Mourning the loss of his mother, haunted by nightmares, 10-year-old Bastian does his best to adapt to the tragic new reality. His father encourages him to be tough and remember that everyone still has responsibilities they have to attend to, regardless of her absence. His father is concerned that Bastian's grades are slipping, he's not turning in his homework, he's distracted in class constantly drawing unicorns. He thinks Bastian is old enough to get his head down out of the clouds and start keeping both feet on the ground. Stop daydreaming, start facing his problems. On his way to school, Bastian is tossed in a dumpster by a gang of bullies after he refuses to give them his lunch money. After he escapes, they confront him again, at which time he hides in Coriander's bookstore run by a gatekeeping old man who questions Bastian's literary bona fides. After proving his merit, Bastian notices the book that Coriander was reading, The NeverEnding Story, with a finely carved metallic medallion depicting 2 intertwined snakes on its cover. A book, the old man notes, that is very different from all the other books. It's not safe. As if by fate, Coriander takes a phone call in the other room, allowing Bastian just enough time to steal the book. He runs to school where he hides in the attic to both avoid his math test and immerse himself in the book the old man seems so desperate to keep him from reading, yet clearly intended for him to read. Coriander was right. It's a book unlike any book Bastian has read before. It engages him so deeply, so realistically, that he begins to question where his reality ends and that of the book begins. The characters speak to him directly and plead for his assistance. Because their world, Fantasia, is being destroyed by a formless, faceless entity called the Nothing. The childlike empress, the heart of all Fantasia, is dying as well. She calls upon the great warrior, Atreyu, to use the magical artifact of protection known as the Orin to seek out a cure before all is lost. Atreyu's heart, his courage, his faith in himself will be tested. Can he find a cure in time, or will Fantasia be destroyed? And is Bastian prepared for the role he too must play in Atreyu's adventures to continue reading, writing, and living the NeverEnding Story? The NeverEnding Story, the movie, is based on The NeverEnding Story, the book, written by German author Michael Ende, published in 1979. Prior to The NeverEnding Story, Ende was already a successful popular author in Germany, known for his award-winning books like 1960's Jim Button and Luke the Engine Driver and 1973's Momo.
Yeah, daddy likey Momo.
The NeverEnding Story, the book, is about a young overweight boy named Bastian Balthazar Bucks who is mourning the loss of his mother. Haunted by nightmares, 10-year-old Bastian does his best to adapt to the tragic new reality. One day, Bastian hides from bullies in Coriander's bookstore where he steals a very special book. He runs to school where he hides in the attic to both avoid his math test and immerse himself in the book the old man seems so desperate to keep him from reading, yet clearly intended for him to read. The old man was right, unusual books, so real, reality blurs, characters speak to him directly, Fantastica is being destroyed by a formless entity called the Nothing, childlike Empress dying as well, Atreyu and the Orin will be tested. Is Bastian prepared to do his part, and for what comes after the events of the movie? Because the movie is only based on the first half of the book. Spoiler alert, like the movie, Bastian does do his part to save Fantastica, but then he stays in Fantastica to help rebuild it with all the wishes he now has after the childlike Empress gives him the Orin. There's a catch though, because every time Bastian makes a wish to build the new Fantastica, it costs him a memory from his life in the real world. The more he rebuilds, the more adventures he goes on, the more he loses, until he has almost no memories of the real world left except for one of his father and one of his own name. The NeverEnding Story is malleable and recreates itself every time a new reader finds the book. Just like Coriander before him, Bastian's life and experiences become part of the story as he interacts with the characters. Bastian rewrites the story for the next person to experience the NeverEnding Story, and that, my friend, is you. That is the true magic of this book, of the concept that it works at multiple layers, telling multiple stories across multiple dimensions of reality. Upon publication in Germany, it was a bestseller and stayed that way for several years. It became popular around the world and was translated into English and published in the US for the first time in 1983. First editions of the NeverEnding Story were printed in special red and green ink to distinguish between scenes that took place in the real world versus scenes that took place in Fantastica, a feature that people with red-green color blindness, like me, call regular book ink. The NeverEnding Story began production in Germany with a budget comparable to around $27 million. It was the most expensive film made outside of the US or Russia at the time, and definitely the most expensive film made in Germany. And it immediately got out of hand. Helmut Dietl, the original director, was overwhelmed by the scope of the production. He wasn't used to working on big visual effects pictures like this. The sets, the robotic dragon puppets, the makeup, the green screening. Dietl met with producer Bernd Eichinger and they agreed that they were going to need to find someone else to do it. They reached out to Wolfgang Petersen, who was fresh off his production of Das Boot, a 1981 film written and directed by Petersen that took 3 years to make and pushed him to his creative and emotional limits. Das Boot was an adaptation of the 1973 novel Das Boot, written by German author Lothar Gunther Buchheim. Das Boot was a critical and box office success that dealt with both the mundanity and horror of submarine warfare in World War II. Das Boot was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Director and Best Screenplay for Petersen, but after all Das Boot was, Petersen was ready to make something that Das Boot wasn't. He wanted to make something his 11-year-old son would enjoy.
Enter the imagination of one young boy.
Would it be all right if I joined you this evening?
And journey into a land of unforgettable adventure.
The Nothing is destroying our world.
Where fantasy becomes reality.
But that's impossible! Save us!
Roger Ebert calls it a real delight. You'll be swept away by the NeverEnding Story.
Working on the movie meant working with original NeverEnding Story writer Michael Ende, which was a problem because according to Petersen in a 2019 article on EW.com, Ende just didn't like the script. Petersen said, quote, "Ende lived in Rome at the time and I said, let me go and see him so we can try to make peace. Maybe if we sit together for some time to work and write the script together so that he could be more involved. He liked that idea, so we did that for quite a while, but it just didn't work out in the end." There were a lot of changes in the script from the book to the movie. Little things like not being able to paint Atreyu green. Big things like only making the movie out of the first half of the book. Petersen understood how important all the details were to Ende and why he would fight as hard as he did to get everything included. But what Ende didn't understand was how to make a 90-minute movie with a limited budget, limited production time, and within the limits of practical visual effects technology of 1983. After reaching an impasse with Ende, Petersen and the producers made the decision to move forward without him. The final script was written by Petersen and Herman Weigel, very much to Ende's dismay, who not only asked that his name be taken off the project, but that the project be stopped immediately and the film never be released, saying, probably, NeverEnding Story, more like never finishing this movie. It's unfortunate because by all accounts, Ende was excited about the movie in the beginning. He believed in its potential to be adapted to live action, but that relationship quickly turned adversarial as Ende took the production to court in an attempt to legally force them to stop. Ende accused them of making so many changes to the story and the characters that it shouldn't even be considered the same thing anymore. He demanded that the name of the movie be changed. The court disagreed. Ende lost and the production continued without his participation or approval. The cast of The NeverEnding Story featured Barrett Oliver as Bastian, Gerald McCraney as his father. Atreyu was played by Noah Hathaway, known from his turn as Boxy on Battlestar Galactica. Coriander was played by Thomas Hill. The childlike Empress was played by Tammy Stronach. In her feature film debut, the voices of Falkor the Luck Dragon, Gamork the Rockbiter, and the film's narrator were all provided by Alan Oppenheimer, well into his Skeletor and Man-at-Arms years on He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Music for The NeverEnding Story was composed by Klaus Doldinger, supplemented by Giorgio Moroder for the US version, because Petersen and the production knew that this movie wasn't just going to be playing in Germany or even just Europe. They had their eyes on the US market and as such needed to cater the film to American sensibilities. That included a new theme song composed by Giorgio Moroder, written by Keith Forsey and sung by Kajagoogoo lead singer Limahl, backed by Ann Calvert and Beth Anderson. By design, the song has no beginning nor an end. It just fades in and then fades out. It is technically the never-ending song that just sort of comes and goes with the wind. It's not in the German version of the movie, but became a solid top 20 hit around the world. To further streamline the film for the American audience, Petersen reached out to his good friend and fellow filmmaker Steven Spielberg. Spielberg was known for having a pretty good record of box office openings in the US market. Americans are notorious for having cartoonishly short attention spans. You need to keep something moving on screen at all times or you might lose them. Spielberg, to his credit, but without official credit, worked with Petersen to trim some fat out of the working cut to help it move a little quicker, a little cleaner, and a full 7 minutes shorter. That's extra toilet time, baby. The NeverEnding Story's distributor, Warner Brothers, had originally intended for another kids' movie, Supergirl, to be their big summer movie for 1984. They relinquished the distribution rights after the poor performance of Superman 3 the year before and conflicts with the producers Alex and Ilya Salkind. Supergirl was pushed back to November by new rights holder TriStar, allowing Warner Brothers to release The NeverEnding Story in July of 1984 with no competition. Well, Ghostbusters and Gremlins. And The Karate Kid. And Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, The Last Starfighter, Buckaroo Banzai, and Star Trek III: Search for Spock. And A Break-In, and Cloak and Dagger, and The Muppets Take Manhattan. Also, the Olympics were very popular on television. The NeverEnding Story brought in roughly $20 million in the US, which would be considered a super bomb for a film with a budget of roughly $27 million. But it was successful in Germany and around the world, bringing its total worldwide tally to more like $100 million. According to a 2021 article on Looper.com, original author Michael Ende called the film, quote, disgusting and revolting, and even went so far as to accuse the production of ruining his story just for the money, claiming they didn't understand the core themes of the book. Roger Ebert gave it 3 out of 4 stars. Gene Siskel thought it looked cheap and ran much too long. Vincent Canby of the New York Times called it a graceless, humorless fantasy for children, adding that it should not frighten most small children, but it may put them prematurely to sleep. But those are reviews by adults. It's not a movie for adults. In fact, that's the entire point of the movie. Gamork, the scary black wolf monster, the servant of the powers behind the nothing, explains it plainly to Atreyu, quote,
Fantasia is the world of human fantasy. Every part, every creature is a piece of the dreams and hopes of mankind. People have begun to lose their hopes and forget their dreams, so the nothing grows stronger. The nothing is the emptiness that's left. It's like a despair destroying this world.
Kids, I can tell you as having been there myself, kids loved it. Just not the parts that were traumatic. Not the parts with the horse and the swamps of sadness. Artax. You stupid horse. There wasn't a lot of licensed merchandise related to the film, some PVC figures that were far more common in international markets. However, today the internet is littered with handmade and unlicensed goods, domestic and foreign. Like our friend Falkor here, who was only $10 on Amazon and worth every penny. Ocean Software released The NeverEnding Story in 1985, a text-based adventure game. Years later, in 2002, Attraction, a game studio based in Germany, released Orin Quest, a first-person platform jumping game that is very loosely based on the original book by Michael Ende. Plagued by development issues, it attempted to be a Myst-style adventure. Reviews upon release were mixed. In 1990, moviegoers were invited to return to Fantasia for the inevitable sequel called The NeverEnding Story 2: The Next Chapter, directed by George T. Miller, starring Jonathan Brandis as Bastian, Kenny Morrison as Atreyu, and John Wesley Shipp as Bastian's dad. Coriander, still played by Thomas Hill, is back to his old benevolent librarian tricks as he again induces Bastian to steal his copy of the NeverEnding Story. The next chapter picks up shortly after the first movie and is inspired by elements of the second half of the original book that were left out of the previous film. It barely made back its budget in the US, but fared much better internationally, especially in Germany, where it was the biggest Warner Brothers opening ever at the time. It did well enough to greenlight another sequel in 1994, The NeverEnding Story 3: Return to Fantasia. Bastian is back once again, this time played by Jason James Richter. No Atreyu, but you'll get Jack Black as Slip, leader of the gang of bullies called the Nasties. It is based on the characters from the original Michael Ende book, but tells a new story bringing many of the characters from Fantasia into our world for a movie that Variety called a charmless, desperate reworking of the franchise that might just as well be titled Bastian Goes to High School. Just a year later, Canadian animation studio Nelvana produced The NeverEnding Story: The Animated Adventures of Bastian Balthazar Bucks. 26 episodes from December of 1995 to May of 1996, inspired by but deviating greatly from the original book. In 2002, Muse Entertainment released Tales from the NeverEnding Story as a series of 4 two-hour movies on HBO in the US, or 13 one-hour episodes if you were in the UK, a live-action series that attempts to reimagine several elements of the mythology, once again flipping the script as it brings Atreyu into the human world. And just this year, in 2022, Deadline broke the story that the NeverEnding Story is once again the talk of the studios here and around the world, with multiple parties making multiple offers, partially due to its international fanbase that extends from Germany to the US to Japan and back, but also thanks to the supernatural power of Stranger Things to revive pop culture entities of the 1980s. The inclusion of the title song from the 1984 film in Season 3 had people all over social media participating in the NeverEnding Challenge. As reported by Deadline, the rights are complicated, frequent litigation as to who owns what. Studios have been trying to figure it out for years. In 2011, Kathleen Kennedy suggested that perhaps an update for the franchise was not meant to be. Michael Ende, the original author who notoriously referred to the original movie as a, quote, gigantic melodrama of kitsch, commerce, plush, and plastic, passed away in August of 1995 due to stomach cancer. So the timing and format of any continuation of the NeverEnding Story is in the estate's hands. The NeverEnding Story is what it always was, a story about empowerment, about finding your purpose, having faith in yourself in a world that seems to darken every day as youth gives way to adulthood. Recognizing that there is real value in fantasy and imagination, hopes and dreams and creativity, holding on to the things you loved as a child as you become the adult you have no choice but to be. There is no way to know how many times Fantasia has been destroyed by the Nothing, nor how many times it will be destroyed in the future. How many children have followed Atreyu's adventures, and how many of us in this world have followed Bastian's adventures? And who might be out there, somewhere now, following ours? Definitely Facebook. The future of Fantasia can be infinite, forever reborn and reinvented, as long as there are people who can dream and hope and create. As long as visual effects technology continues to get better and more affordable, there will always be another chapter in The NeverEnding Story. We got time for the end slate? We'll squeak it in. Squeak it in? Thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Thank you very much to those of you who already are. If you're in the position to help the channel grow, if you would like early access to the videos ad-free, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/toygalaxy and let us know in the comments down below if you've ever seen the 1984 film and if you've been to therapy for the trauma you experienced in the swamps of sadness. Gotta admit, I was dreading rewatching the movie for this video. I hadn't seen it in roughly 25 years, mostly because of that scene. Stupid Artax. But after rewatching it, knowing it was coming and knowing how the whole thing ends, it wasn't so bad. Props to the performances by Noah Hathaway and both stunt horses, neither of which died during the filming. That's an urban legend. And to the composers and directors for creating such an emotionally impactful moment. It's why I never owned a white horse or lived in a swamp. Movies like that can scar you deep and scar you for life.